Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAP. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Charisse Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. Today, I have a returning guest, Tima Bell, founder of Bell Design Group in Los Angeles, California. Born in New York City and raised in both Venice Beach, California, and Peaks Island, Maine, two totally different places, Tima's passion for art led him to the practice of architecture as a launching point to explore the three-dimensional space within his own paintings. As a founding principal of Bell Design Group, Tima continues to explore the physicality of art and architecture through his work designing across widely varying typologies, ranging from studios and tech, residential, hospitality, housing, commercial, civic, and institutional spaces. The project we will be talking about today is the East End Studios in Glendale, California. East End Glendale Studios, nestled just northeast of Los Angeles, introduces a contemporary touch to the storied world of film production. The use of insulated concrete form construction, or ICF, enhances both the building's acoustic properties and its sustainability by minimizing material waste. This newly developed 96,034 square foot lot replaces outdated facilities with a modern complex that caters to the needs of today's filmmakers. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My returning guest today is Tima Bell, founder of Bell Design Group in lovely Los Angeles, California, which is where I will be in August. The project we are chatting about today is another studio project, the East End Studios in Glendale. Tima, welcome back. How are you?
Pleasure to be back. Thank you very much. I'm doing well. It's beautiful here in Los Angeles in June. I hope it's beautiful for you in August when you come.
I'm worried. I'm taking my granddaughter to Universal Studios, and I'm worried I'm going to melt.
Get the VIP tour. It's not that much more money, and you're the front of the line. From everybody I've talked to, spending the money on the VIP tour is more than worth it. You're at the front of every line.
Thank you, because I was looking at, I hadn't looked at the passes real closely yet. We got the hotel and flights booked.
Sure.
And I'm not a line waiter. I'm not very good at that.
Honestly, every friend I've had that does the VIP says it's the best experience. Better than the one at Disneyland, better than any of the ones. You literally go right to the front. They have a guide. It's good all the way around. You'll enjoy it.
I will take that advice, especially in August when it's, I don't know, like 400 degrees like it usually is in LA. So we start all of our podcasts with some fun icebreaker question that I make up based on my mood the day I wrote your script.
All right, what do you got?
So for you today, this is my second interview with you about a production studio project. So what I want to know is, what's the most interesting or fun thing that you have seen around a production studio lot while you were on site or at a grand opening?
So I'm going to answer a little differently. Sometimes we come back to tweak little things or to do additions or adjustments. And one of the studios we built, Siren Studio, had... I was filming the commercial for avocados. I don't know if you remember, it was maybe 8 years ago, but there was a commercial for avocados where they had all the different animals talking about avocados. And that particular day, they had all the different animals. That was just amazing. Just watching, a zebra, a llama, all these different animals getting rolled into the studio gave the true meaning to an elephant door when the elephant rolled through the giant doorways into the studio. That one, and the other one, a GM one where they hung, I don't know, it's my favorite GM commercial for a truck, and they hung all the lights from the grid, these single bulb lights. It's still one of my favorite GM commercials. The fun part is obviously I love the architecture and it's the fun of building it, but watching what they actually create in those spaces and then seeing it come out on screen is is really a joy as well. So, but
Well,
the
and
animals take the cake because we had to walk across the lot. There was a coffee shop that I had also designed as part of the studio, so we'd walk across to get coffee, and my whole staff would walk by to get coffee, and we just all day long we were just like, oh my god, it's like a zoo, a menagerie, It's really fantastic.
got to somewhat experience Noah's Ark.
Exactly.
Well, and funny thing is I was having a brain cramp before we started this. Siren Studios is the one we talked about on your
Yes,
first
it was.
interview.
I remember that. That's right. I remembered it as I said it.
So let's talk about this project, the East End Studios in Glendale. So production studio projects are so unique compared to your typical building that most of us work on every day. Let's start with a little history and background behind this project.
Sure. So East End is a new player in studios in Los Angeles and New York, and I believe abroad. They came to us. This was their first studio. They had no studio experience, although they had hired people in place that did, and we got recommended as the architect. So they found this site, which was an existing sort of small multi-studio site in Glendale, which is a little bit out of the way when you consider where studios are in Los Angeles. But this one actually is a decent location, and they came to us to do their first project, and it was wonderful. They didn't have their East End began as more of a real estate company, and this was an avenue that was performing exceptionally well in real estate. So they that's how they entered into this. I would say now they are a studio company, still real estate, but they just love the studio aspect of the process, and they're dug in. They want to be studio players. They're building 3-4 major studios in Los Angeles and New York, and growing beyond. So this project was their first one, their baby. We gave them an enormous amount of guidance that I think helped them in many of their other projects. And for the most part, they listened, which was great as a client. And then they had some great consultants that they brought in, which gave us some direction. It's got to be a shared experience to create these things. And super happy with the outcome of the product.
I love to hear stories of a company recognizing an opportunity to pivot and do something new and being brave enough to do that.
Yeah.
This was that's a different animal.
Yeah, I will say the pandemic created a lot of those. Obviously, as we all know, the pandemic changed the way we work. And a lot of real estate companies build office buildings. That's sort of the tried and true. You can lease it, you can grow it, you can lease it, you can grow it. And that's sort of a method of developing. When office buildings went out of favor, they have to spend their money. They get capital investment, and the capital investment has to spend it. They're not allowed to hold it because anybody can just hold money. They're supposed to spend and get, large returns. And so they looked at the landscape and decided to take a flyer. It's very difficult for developers to build studios. They're a different animal in the real estate world. They don't lease straight out of the gate. You have to build them almost on spec. Although, as we know, for the most part, studios up until very recently were 90% occupancy in Los Angeles. So it wasn't a huge risk, but it was still a risk nonetheless to move forward.
Interesting. So before we get into project specifics, tell me about the site. You just briefly mentioned it. Before you got started, what you had to do to that site with these multi studios to prepare for this project.
Well, that site was difficult in that it had a lot of conditions on it. There were telephone poles down the middle of it. It's half residential and half business. That was actually the biggest leap. It is on a major artery, which is Glendale, and then it has a much smaller street on the rear. And it was architecturally a careful manipulation and balancing of all these parameters: the zoning aspect, the access aspect, the logistics of it, and then obviously dealing with the easements and the much of the infrastructure that was already on the site. The hardest one is the zoning. We realized very quickly that we couldn't build a studio on the back half of the lot. It's not the end of the world, but it really defines how you have to build. And these are 50-foot tall buildings. So how do you build a 50-foot tall building on a major artery in a city that is concerned about that, those elements in relationship to pedestrians? The site presented a number of challenges, but as I always say, in architecture, we're presented with parameters. The idea is that we start with a tabula rasa, but zoning, infrastructure, client needs, programming, they sort of move us into a position that says, okay, this is the way or the area you have to build. And then it's our job to create magic out of that.
It's kind of funny. This is my second interview in a week on a project in California on a site that had two different zoning situations.
Yeah.
It's like, is this a common thing? That's
it
not
is.
something I see every day.
It's quite common, actually, especially on sites that are this large. Anything that has a pretty reasonable sizing can run that ground. Some are easier. We do affordable housing. We had a site that was half commercial and half residential and zoned, and we were able to manipulate that into a building that worked appropriately. On this one, because this was a full commercial building and not housing, we couldn't put any of this building in the back half of the property.
So I'm going down rabbit holes already. So were they able to use the back half of the property?
Yes. What we did is we had we came up with a good solution. First of all, parking. All studios require parking, even though per the new California code, parking isn't required for all projects. But studios just park. There's a lot of people that come. There's trucks. There's all kinds of avenues that people have to, or that the logistics of a production needs to entail. And the other part of it is we found, I don't want to call it a loophole, but let's call it an area that allowed us to expand further. And that is, we were able to build a covered canopy as long as we put solar power on the top of the canopy. So that canopy then became an opportunity to find different avenues of production that could be in covered and enclosed spaces that we're able to do that on the back half of the property. And ultimately, I believe that's where we're going to put a mill, maybe roll out temporary events, things like that in a covered, protected area because of the solar canopy.
Nice way to solve the problem.
Yes. Yeah.
So what were the owners' goals for this project? What were they asking you to create? Or did they know? I know this was a new arena for them.
They didn't know. The majority of, they basically left the dust. They said, we want to build a studio. What's the best studio we can build? Now, they had a studio consultant in place, a gentleman named Craig Chapman, who gave us a lot of direction on what type of studio would be right to build. It's important to note that studios are built according to the productions they can receive. There are smaller studios that are built for commercials. There's FX VR studios that are built for the new way of VR filming, which doesn't require a lot of the elements of a regular studio. There's features. That's a huge studio. It has to be at least 40,000 square feet. There's streamers, which fall in between. And that's ultimately what we ended up moving towards, which was a streamer studio. The ability for Netflix, Hulu, some of these companies that want to film but only need about 20,000 square feet of studio. Once we'd made that determination, a lot of the stuff sort of falls in line. How the studios are going to be divided, how they're going to be accessible, how much office needs to be created, and what sort of amenities, production and otherwise, are created on site to support.
Well, we've been talking for, 5 or 10 minutes, and I've already learned way more than I ever thought I would know about a studio.
Yeah.
So once you outline
with secrets, I'm gonna
No,
in a bunch of studio architects.
It sounds like a lot of fun to do a project like that. I always, after being in this business for a long time, whenever I get to do a project that's more unique, it's something new, it's something different. It's fun to solve those problems and figure out all these new needs, or for me,
Sure.
specify new products I normally don't ever get an opportunity to specify. Maybe I'm a huge nerd, but I actually like that.
Look, at the root, a lot of architects are huge nerds. We love the detailing. We love the product concepts and specifications. We had some fun products on this one. But at the end of the day, it's interesting because the architecture of this building, it's a windowless box for the most part. The studio itself, all of the beauty in designing comes down to infrastructure and logistics. And for that, you have to understand production. That's a unique ability that I have, and I explain it a lot with my staff. And we actually have other production companies come and give us lectures, and we talk about these things because staying at the forefront of understanding how production is accomplished is the success of a studio. They're ultimately factories. I call them Willy Wonkas because they protect their IP so intensely. But they change like every factory. You know, the modernization and qualifications around these factories are they change, not production to production, but let's say every couple of years. Maybe there's a new lighting system, a new trucking system, new way of doing wardrobe, all these different factors. And your studio that I create or that we create needs to be able to address those and respond to those. And so that's some of the beauty is the logistics of the operations within the studio, which is super interesting to design for as an architect. That's true program in my mind. It's not static. You have to understand how these things maneuver and operate.
Well, in my opinion, a true successful piece of architecture is one that works exactly the way it's supposed to for the owners, whether
Sure.
it's a box or the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
If once you walk inside that building, you can't do what you need to do, that's not a success.
She did fall in love with the Sultan, so I would call that, that's a success.
Yeah,
right?
well, okay, so that wasn't necessarily a failure.
That's a great point. No.
So once you outlined the owner's goals and program, what was your design vision? Obviously, it's a square box. So what was your design vision? What broadly tell me about what you were picturing the spaces inside this building?
So interestingly enough, inside was not our largest concern, or not mine. It was actually what we're going to do with the facade facing Glendale Boulevard. Glendale Boulevard is a major transit. It basically takes most cars to the what do we call it? The Americana, I think it's called. There's a lot of traffic about people going into Glendale to be to shopping, and this route is the way that they go. We're also right across the street from a very it's a much visited strip mall. It's not really a strip mall. It's just, but there's a lot of cars, a lot of community. Not only that, people in Glendale, at least in this area, walk. And so again, we're sitting here with a building that's going to be 50 feet tall along a major thoroughfare. How do we address that? So the facade from the pedestrian level through the entirety was the biggest concern at the outset. And then obviously the adjacency to the buildings was challenging, and that was an interesting design part. At the end of the day, we had about 6 inches from an adjacent building. How do you finish that in its construction? And then the studios themselves, how can we make sure that we continue with a high quality Class A studio that gets delivered with all the other considerations I just mentioned, with essentially a pedestrian and visible aesthetic facade on the Glendale side, but the parking side having the opportunity to deal with the logistics, but still make them all work together. That was the challenge.
Sounds like an easy project to me.
And they're all easy projects. No, that's the best thing about architecture is the challenge, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the parameters get set, and how do you make something beautiful and functional all at the same time? I mean, that's, from Corbusier to Kahn and earlier and later, it's what we all attempt to achieve.
So let's start getting into some more specifics. So
Sure.
we're gonna hang outside on the site for a while on the next few questions before we start moving inside the building. So you just mentioned it before. You had some challenges with these power poles that ran right down the middle of the property. Tell me about why that was a challenge and how you dealt with it.
Well, I mean, anytime you deal with a utility, it's a challenge. Utilities are these they're privately owned companies that act like government entities. And, they're under no auspices of delivering things on time. Their schedule is all over the place, and it can interrupt your construction process throughout the whole element. we basically, we did the smart thing. We took the utilities underground, which worked. It just, the challenge was timing that with the permitting and the start of construction so that we weren't going to be held up in the process of construction. And I have to applaud my team and the client who had some pull with Glendale for making sure that the city also leaned on the utility to make sure to deliver the underground after our demo, during our grading process, so we could move forward with building construction in short order. And for the most part, I think maybe we lost 2 weeks off the schedule, which is magic. I think every other project involved where I've had to include a utility company have lost months.
That's a serious testament to your team, because every project I've ever encountered that has had to deal with the utility, sometimes it's a year or more.
Especially Los Angeles. Glendale has their own utilities, so I'll give it up to Glendale Water and Power. They actually came in and made that happen in a good amount of time. But our engineers were also on board, making sure to get our drawings out. We assisted with the facilitation of a lot of the permitting process. While there was an expediter in place, we don't take a back seat and just hand over drawings. We actually make phone calls, push forward, make sure to be in the forefront of questions that might be asked by the utility company. So while it was challenging, it wasn't the most challenging aspect on the site, but it was something where we had to maneuver and really look ahead and make sure that it didn't kill our schedule.
So when you took the utilities underground, did you upgrade any? I mean, I'm assuming a studio uses a lot of power.
Yeah. No question. We ended up building a transformer on the back half of the site, something that is allowed in the residential portion. So we ended up building a transformer room to be able to deliver, I believe, you'll have to forgive me, I don't have a tip of my tongue, but I believe we're close to 12,000 watts of power for the building. It might be 16,000, but it's a large amount of power. The studios obviously run a large amount of power.
Well, that was a good opportunity then, even though it might have been a pain in the rear end, just, taking the poles out.
Sorry to interrupt. That's the advantage of running off of main thoroughfare. The power was available. That's something that is a big consideration when we look at sites for studios is there power available to make these happen?
So tell me a little bit about the remainder of the site design. What did you do here for parking, trucks and loading, site amenities, landscaping? What all is going on this site now?
So, interestingly enough, the balance of the commercial and residential gave us the opportunity to have parking on the rear of the property. And it does fit close to 200 cars, which is excellent. We have turning radiuses for our trucks, something we always calculate into our site conditions. Most people think they're these small box trucks. It's not true. They're 60-footers. We got to be able to bring them in, park them, unload them, or position them, unload them, and then park them. Usually there's only about 3 or 4 on a streamer, but you've got to consider them. The unfortunate aspect is we had to do this off of the smaller street on the rear of the property, which typically is fully parked on both sides of the street. So we had to make sure to put a wide enough entry with, the gate and all of the access or the limiting of the access, the securitized access. But we took careful consideration of the turning radiuses, the ability to park all the cars, where the trucks could go, load, load out, put away, also come back and load in. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the aspect of that covered area that has for the solar canopy, as they call it, being able to utilize that for various resources for the studio itself that couldn't fit on the front half of the property, such as a mill, event spaces, storage, things like that we're able to use that covered area for on the back half of the property.
You just said something that I hadn't thought about till you just said it, which is why I love doing these interviews. All these things pop up so I can go down rabbit holes for hours. Security. I would imagine security is particularly important for any studio, just the sheer cost of the equipment they have to use and those kinds of things. What do you do for that?
That's the biggest part, is the IP. The IP is the most important. So, we don't have we We have basically a localized closed circuit data on the interior of the building, so that the filming will go straight to a server, but not be connected to the internet, so no one can hack in. That's cybersecurity for these places. That's where it starts. All of the doors are fobbed. You can't get into a place unless you have access and legal access. And then obviously on the Glendale side, the Glendale Street side, the major thoroughfare, we have our front door and our lobby, which is buzzed in. Once you're in, you meet with the receptionist before you can go to any of the production offices. On the back half of the property, we have high walls all the way down the street, with other than the opening guard gate, which has a securitized armed guard at that location. And then typically there's maybe, 3 or 4 security officials walking around the property, depending on the size and scope of the production. But the building itself is locked down with fobs, and the site is high fences and we put lighting all across the back of the building, so that parking lot is a tennis court at the end of the day. It's super, super well lit.
I'm surprised. I guess I didn't realize how attractive getting a hold of that content would be to people. I thought, well, you don't want people stealing equipment. I never thought about.
No, the IP is far more valuable, and it can be valuable on so many levels. For instance, for argument's sake, let's say they film parts of the Avengers at the studio, right? And they have Thor's hammer, and Thor's hammer looks different in this movie, but no one's released it yet. You don't want someone going in and photographing or finding a way in to photograph Thor's hammer and then leaking it online. That would be detrimental to the film's release. So there's a lot of protection involved from the architectural aspect and from management in the process. Cameras too. Cameras everywhere.
Yeah, well, I would hope so. It's a studio.
And one yeah.
So this is just purely for my benefit, but everybody else's now too. In your project information, I kept seeing the term mill/base camp. What does that mean?
So a mill is let's say a glorified wood shop. It's where they build the sets. It's where they build the props. Typically, there'll be a portable painting area. It's your arts and crafts. The sets are the most important. Typically, a load-in will take 2 weeks to build a set on the stage that will then be shot, and then they'll light the set and off we go. But they need to build the set, and building it off-site and delivering it in costs a lot of money. The best studios have a mill on site. Warner Brothers has a massive 100,000 square foot mill in their basement. Various studios, legacy studios, have mills all the time. So we make sure to include the opportunity for a mill on the property. It's not always used. Some productions bring in their own sets, but often enough, if it's available, it's incredibly valuable. Base camp is where basically a crew eating area is set up, along with loading and unloading of items. Often the higher end actors, the top end actors, will bring their own trailer on site. So you need to park that trailer somewhere. Invariably, there might be wardrobe in a trailer rather than in the studio. Production sort of balance the way that they support all of these things. Hair and makeup might be in a trailer rather than on site. Even though we provide for it on site, just might be something that they have line itemed out that they want special for their production. So base camp is where all of these elements take place in the exterior of the building, normally on a surface parking lot.
When I saw the mill, I was like, all I can think of is a lumber mill. What could that possibly be?
They grind grain for the day's bread. That's what.
Yeah. Now I get it.
That is the common nomenclature in productions for it's essentially a wood shop. They build sets.
I was so worried I was going to sound like a complete moron asking that question, but I had to know the answer. But I'm glad I asked it now because I learned some more stuff. So let's talk about the building, starting with the exterior design. Tell me about the aesthetic that you wanted to achieve and the materials that you used to achieve it. I know this facade was important, so now I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the facade, again, a studio is essentially a windowless box. So what we did is we laid out a studio, and then on the front side of it, we'll call it the front side, which faces the artery of Glendale Boulevard, we made a stack of offices. which is basically 3 stories of office plus a mezzanine. Now, offices don't have a problem with light or air or any of that stuff. So we really focused on what would be a contemporary facade. It's important to note the way the facade was driven was, what does it feel like to be a pedestrian in front of this building? And what does it feel like to be a driver? And what does it feel like to view the entire building at once? Which isn't that easy given its positioning on the street, but it is still something that you have to consider architecturally. And what we came up with was a series of trapezoid patterns of glass held inside concrete frames. The concrete is a poured-in-place concrete. It has snap ties. It's finished off with all its ties available. And the glazing is a low-E reflective glass that sits in between. But what's interesting about them is the glass sits at an angle to the street. So up high, the glass sort of sits flush behind the concrete, and then down low, it pushes back in, which allowed us to put planting and benches at the pedestrian level. So while you're walking along the street at the pedestrian level, even though there's a 50-foot high building looming over you, it doesn't loom because the building is actually pushed back at your level, giving a sort of breathable quality, almost 4 feet, to the feeling of where you are. You have your sidewalk, you have another 4 feet. Only the concrete columns come out and touch at the sidewalk level, which sort of gives a rhythm to the building. The angles were essentially an aesthetic that we knew that because we angled it back, we felt that by tilting in and creating these trapezoid glass sections running down the building, it would give a rhythm from further away, and for the vehicle that drives by to see a building sort of flip-flop its trapezoids all the way down the building. I feel that the facade is incredibly successful at all levels, pedestrian, far away. There were elements of structure that were problematic, which, in similar situations for architects, you have to make adjustments. I'm not particularly fond of the concrete bond beam at the top, but the cost of not doing that made it come into play. And ultimately, the beauty of that facade is I just adore it. It's slightly brutalist, which I'm super interested in right now, but it's also very contemporary. I think it's like one of those buildings that will hopefully be shot in a sci-fi film one of these days, because it has that sort of universal futuristic quality. But that being said, at a pedestrian level, it's quite engaging. On the rest of the building, you don't have a lot of choices. It's stucco or windscreen, really, for the most part. Sorry, not windscreen. Well, we call it rain screen, but it's essentially cement panels. We were able to do the cement paneling on the majority of the building, and we're able to color the cement paneling, which gives it this. There's a beautiful situation on this particular building that as the sun sets, the palm trees get reflected onto the building. And the building on the back side, this is the side that faces the parking lot. So really, all the people that see it are production. But what they see somewhere around 3-4 o'clock is the shadows of the palm trees hit the building, and they just hit it perfectly that it looks like a California painting, like a hockey painting. So we're able to color the building to accept these transitions, deal with the sunlight a bit, and the client was open to allowing us to be aesthetically responsible for all sides of the building. So the design of the facade is something I'm super proud of. It's one of the better buildings that we've designed, and it fits that boulevard just perfectly for what it does.
How often do you get to do something like that on a studio?
Not often.
So you might be trend setting.
Yeah, one of the things about being a factory is the money for aesthetics goes out the window. Ask any factory designer. I know a bunch of them in Ohio, and they still get to do that much to the exterior. It ends up being a concrete building that they paint, and maybe there's an overhang or a couple of windows, but it's not as aesthetically designed forward, as I would say. And I will give it to our client that they allowed us and pushed for this. And it's funny because I look at some of their future work, and it's not quite that. So I think I had the luck of having a first-time studio builder. Once they kind of figured out the idea that this is a factory, I think they pulled back on a lot of their other aesthetic stuff. But this one, and they're in luck as well. This is their first studio, and it's beautiful. It is one of the better looking studios. If you look at, Paramount has its beautiful gates. Warner Brothers has those giant walls, which they've muralized with their, cartoons and images. But ultimately, you can't walk down those streets and feel comfortable. Anybody who's walked down, I think it's Gower off of Melrose in Los Angeles, you feel this sidewalk building shooting 50 feet next to you. It's like a De Chirico painting, and you're overwhelmed by it. Whereas this one, there's just a beauty of engagement that I'm really pleased.
Well, maybe that will motivate other studio people going forward, building new ones. Like, hey, we want one that looks pretty like that.
Well, we're actually building a few more and have similar considerations around exactly that. And it's interesting. And I think in the future studio we're building, we actually move the wall back and we run a line of plants at 10 feet so they can grow over. So the landscape area that a pedestrian walks next to, so the area a pedestrian walks next to is actually landscape spilling over into landscape finish before the looming wall of the building. Again, creating these levels of engagement, pedestrian, vehicular, and beyond.
Well, I'm sure that warms it up a lot too.
Sure. Yes.
What about I saw there was really no details about it, but I saw in the description there's a roof deck. What's going on there?
So the roof deck's interesting because, as everyone loves a roof deck, beautiful views. I mean, we were up there I think a couple of weeks ago, mountain views all the way around, looking down. You look into Glendale, you look at the 5 freeway, you look to Chavez Ravine where the Dodgers play. Sort of all of these things it's just beautiful. But why a roof deck for a studio? Well, not everybody wants to eat in a parking lot. Not everyone wants to have an event in a parking lot. You finish filming and there's a wrap party. You really want to hold it in the parking lot? And so studios don't have a lot of amenities in Los Angeles, especially newer ones, because they're constrained on their sites. So being able to offer I think it ends up being about 8,000 square foot, 10,000 square foot roof deck, it's huge. Not only can they do events up there, like wrap parties or release parties, all these different events can take place up there. They can actually shoot up there. We've set enough power up there that if they want to have they want to use it as a pseudo location, they can furnish it and shoot on it as they wish. It is an absolutely gorgeous amenity for a studio to have, and we're happy to be able to include it. And the studio consultant really fought for it, but we also worked hard to make it be just one of those places that you'd like to be at if you were shooting in that space. The hard part about it is, and this is the hard part about any roof deck, is furnishing. When you have 10,000 square feet of roof deck, it's not 6 chairs and a sofa. It's upwards of $100,000 worth of outdoor furniture to truly furnish it. And the client is vacillating between putting down permanent furniture or making it minimal. But when you make it minimal, you got to be careful because you end up with basically a building that looks underfurnished. We had this issue on another roof deck that we did, and it's a good problem for the client to have, but one they do need to solve.
Well, and that's a good piece of information because I don't know how many times I've asked a question about a roof deck because I love roof decks.
Sure.
Especially love knowing that you can look out over where I just went to Dodger Stadium for the first time about a year and a half ago for a concert. Flew down there and went with a friend.
It's amazing. Oh, look, I want to be clear. We don't see Dodger Stadium. We see the Chavez Ravine where Dodger Stadium is located.
But we had to drive through there to get there. And it's beautiful around there. So I was picturing what this must look like down in that area, sitting up there.
It's worse. Yeah. I mean, look, we're in Glendale. We're in a very commercial area of Glendale. But I'll tell you, when you're on that roof deck, it's just a line of greenery all the way around. It's really beautiful.
Well, that furnishing problem sounds like a good problem to have.
Exactly.
I mean, anybody working in that studio is going to love that that's available. And plus, those rooftop fights where somebody flies off the building,
Exactly. Well, maybe a romantic sunset or a conversation, you get all of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that. No, I'm glad I asked that question too. So projects like this have many unique requirements. Stuff I don't ever get to see. Things like sound stages, story and post-production offices, green rooms, wardrobe rooms, hair and makeup, which I wish I had here every morning. Tell me about a couple of the unique requirements you had to consider for these spaces that we would not typically encounter in our day-to-day work and, kind of what you did there.
A lot of it is about size and scale, and all of it is about logistics. I'll give you an interesting fact for a studio. The trusses have to be able to support an enormous amount of weight. I always say that you have to be able to hang a truck off of 2 trusses. So the way you build the buildings is not your typical big box building. If it was, then anybody who builds a Costco could build a studio, but that doesn't work like that. Those trusses need to support the weight. Plus, you have to have careful tracking of how they're constructed, because ultimately someone's got to go up there and rope everything off, like the lights, the weights, all these things that come down, set divisions. So the design of the trusses is in and of itself an important factor of the studio that has to be considered when you're creating them. And when you have trusses, you have to support them, but you're not allowed columns. So now that's where the architectural and engineering start to meet, and you start having discussions on how these are put together. Things like hair and makeup and wardrobe, a lot of it's about logistics and size. If you're not aware of how much wardrobe is required, the wardrobe room's going to be too small. If you're not aware of how hair and makeup leads, where you go after you go to hair and makeup and then on to set, you don't understand the green room. So again, this is one of the benefits that I have of being in this particular typology, is that my father was an actor. I come from the industry and I understand production. And again, we keep abreast of it and stay consistent. And knowing how that stuff works is an important factor in the relationship of how they're programmed in place on the stage. Something simple is you might have a prop room or a camera room where you're storing some of your expensive goods, like we talked about, and they normally move a lot of things around on carts. You have to protect your walls. So maybe we put stainless steel or a chair rail or a cart rail. These are things that if you don't think about that, and when you're building a studio, they're misses. And that's an important aspect. You don't want your building looking run down after 3 weeks of use. And let me be very clear, productions are not nice to buildings. Imagine a production is, 30 cats in your sofa. Ultimately you gotta have a pretty industrial sofa, not to have it all scratched up and destroyed at the end. So these guys come in and they beat the crap out of your building. So you need to make it durable in the right places, and you need to understand how they're going to be moving through your building in the process. That's really the key element to those interior, wardrobe, logistics, hair and makeup, green room. You've got to understand how people are going to move through those spaces.
I've over the course of doing this for 2.5 years now, I've interviewed a handful of architects who had some kind of personal experience outside of architecture in the typology that they now design. A recent one was a vineyard. And it's a game changer in how those architects approach the design of those buildings, having that personal knowledge and really taking it to that level of detail of understanding how that building is used.
You're right. But before we go too far, I do want to say that as architects, it's also our job to understand how thing works if we're not associated with it. So I don't want to sell myself short and say I can only do studios. I love a vineyard. And even though I don't know anything about them, or I only know what I've gone through the tasting room and the tours, it would be, there's a level of research involved, even in studios. Even though I understand productions, like I said, I have people come in and give us lectures about them consistently, because even though you understand, there's more to know. And nothing prepares you fully for the way something's going to work. So you have to do your research and really be on the ball.
Yeah, well, and I don't know that I've ever interviewed anybody that doesn't.
Yeah.
But I've just noticed a different, I don't know, maybe it's a little more heart from the people who have actually done that before.
Right.
Had a family business.
I want an added Lego. It's a little bit of added talent that you get to have in a project when you understand how the project works, for sure.
So let's talk about the interior design. We just mentioned some of the types of spaces that are included in this building. What are some of the unique material choices or design decisions you had to make? Like you said, you have to. I went through the whole abusing the walls things when I worked at a firm that designed schools.
Right.
A school will look like trash within the first week if you don't have, if you don't protect your walls. So I totally get that. What are some of those kinds of considerations you have to make inside of a studio?
Well, I
for
mean, sound is always the
materials?
most important. The studio itself needs to be sound protected. So anything you put adjacent to it, you need really like super strong sound mitigation. Ultimately, the production spaces are they're special. They are not your typical office structure. You'll have your executive offices for your showrunners, but you need to have writers' rooms, you need to have bullpens, you need to have logistics rooms. So a lot of it matters about how those people will use the spaces. For instance, the logistics rooms needs whiteboards where we'll do the paint on a wall so they can write on the wall and be able to erase it. The the wardrobe room needs to have great lighting and a changing area. Invariably, you're designing the interiors so that the use of the space is comfortable, aesthetically pleasing. We have beautiful views, fresh air. It's a gorgeous place to work. But you have to remember that they're out in 8 weeks. They're not permanent residents. So a production will come in, shoot, use the space, and then be out. And then within 1 week, you have to be ready for the next group to come in. And it has to look phenomenal when it does. So the durability of the materials is super vital. You know, the carpets, even though it's a good looking carpet, it's industrial. The cabinetry is laminate, but it's a great aesthetic, but it's laminate, so it's not going to get abused or torn up over time. And really, one of the other elements that was really important to the client is to have the highest ceilings possible on the interior, which was a massive. Oh my God, I have to give it to my project manager, Luis Macias, on this one, because he had to, we had truss joists carrying the office floors, and we had to figure out how to size down the air conditioning so that they didn't run under the truss joists, so that they could run through the truss joists. And if anybody knows truss joists, there's only a certain amount of penetrations you're allowed before they get compromised. So it's this enormous math and puzzle game as to how many times we can pierce a truss joist with a 6-inch or 8-inch duct. And that, I have to give it to him. He did a masterful coordination with the mechanical engineer to make sure that the ceilings kept their I think it's 9'6" height to the bottom of the truss joist. In some instances, we left the ceiling open to allow more height. In other ones, we closed it off to deal with some sound mitigation. The resulting feeling is Class A office with gorgeous views and super easy access to get to the stages, because that's also big. Is production comes in for 2 weeks, does all their logistics, writing, all that stuff. And then once the shooting starts, there's this constant transference of people, whether it's PAs, writers, whatever it is, going production room to set, to editing room to set, back and forth. And you need to make that ease of access important. So like our staircases and our elevators and internal access routes are excellent. Also part of the good interior design process that needs to be considered in the logistics of production.
You just triggered another rabbit hole. So I also spent 6.5 years working in MEP.
Oh, okay.
How much more involved
Totally.
are the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems in a studio?
They have to be perfect. One of the things I think I mentioned in our last podcast, but remains true, is the studio can't be a detriment to the production. There can't be a delay in production because something doesn't work. Everything needs to be thought out carefully, placement, location, operation, backup. Everything needs to be in place so that should something go wrong, it's easily addressed, fixable, or adjusted, and you don't lose a day of production because when the studio becomes a problem, no one will shoot there. Pure and simple. So the studio needs to be at a minimum operational and ideally supportive of a production success. The majority of that is tied into the MEP. Power needs to be consistent without fluctuating. It needs to be located in large amounts at various locations around the studios. Air conditioning needs to be reliable, and should it not be reliable, you need to have the staff or the vendor rep on hand at moment's notice to come out and assist it. These days, everything is tablet automatic, so you've got to have an excellent data system to be able to carry the information. The last studio we did, Apple took the lease, and we worked hand in hand with them on data I learned so much about how to improve the data, which I was able to bring to this studio, the data relationships on the infrastructure. So I know you said MEP, but I want to be clear that the entire infrastructure of the building is there to make it seamless. And the amount of coordination and careful understanding of everything that goes into place is super vital. I'll give you an example. We designed the mechanical systems initially for 150 square feet per ton of the mechanical system. That's the way a studio gets built because of the volume, right? We initially designed it for 200. The cost was astronomical. The studio came back and said, "What can we do?" We went down to 150, but realized that on any day where the temperature was going to be more than 110, we couldn't guarantee the mechanical. And so that was enormous discussion and balance that the client, the MEP, and the architect, we had to consider. So how often will Glendale be 110? Go back to history. Well, it was 110 3 days in 2023. Can we afford to be down 3 days? Will it go down? So it was a super interesting conversation about what happens if it goes down. Do you supplement with offsite cooling, a backup generator? There's all kinds of things that come into the discussion about how these things can operate and be successful. So yes, the coordination with the MEP and the other consultants, it's super vital in the process. And what's beautiful about it, Therese, and I'm sure you know this, having been at MEPs, you learn. That's the best part. I learn. Every aspect of this involves a newer learning sensibility. So I can talk about it with you, or I can bring it to the next project and make it better. And I will tell you that they learned, East End learned, and took a lot of the information to other architects that worked on their projects, which is fine. I know what we do as quality, and I don't have a problem sharing our information, making sure that studios are better, worldwide.
Well, I can promise you that your consultants also learn, because
Absolutely.
I went from architecture to the MEP side after the recession in 2008. And when that relationship is good and that collaboration happens, it raises the project on every level.
Every level.
And it doesn't always happen. I remember a project in MEP where we got a call from the architect like the day the project was supposed to go out for bids, and they had all new ceiling plans, and now our ductwork didn't fit.
That's what I meant.
And they wanted it right now.
Yeah.
Revised right. You can't do that right now.
No.
There's so much more involved in that. And so those kinds of failings, I would imagine, would be disastrous on a project like this, where
it's architecture, there's always, but yes, there's no luxury for last minute. You have to do this as much as the client. And look, the client's a developer. They're going to push, and they did constantly. When are we going to get this? When are we going to get this? But we made sure to take our time to coordinate, because a mistake up front could lead to disaster when they're trying to make their money back on the operation. So we needed to make sure everything was copacetic.
So good lesson out there, peoples. Talk to your consultants.
Coordinate. Yes.
Oh, gosh. I don't know why we don't do a better job of that sometimes. What would you say your biggest design challenge on this project was, and how did you solve it?
Biggest design challenge. Fitting into the site was initially the biggest design challenge. The biggest design challenge wasn't actually a design challenge. I feel like we designed the crap out of the building and it looks beautiful. The biggest challenge was that the client hired the contractor hired a subcontractor who, I think the job was too big for that particular subcontractor. And unfortunately, that was concrete. And this building is primarily concrete. So there was just a lot of mistakes during the process of pouring the walls and getting things in place. We ended up having to do a lot of drywall details where I wanted to have concrete details. The beauty of doing a concrete building, especially when you get to make some of it aesthetic, is that you get to detail it and end up with a Tadao or Louis Kahn or Corbusier, something kind of quite beautiful in concrete. And unfortunately, not everywhere. The facade ended up like I wanted it to, but there were a lot of interior detailing that I would have preferred to be concrete detailing, and unfortunately, the subcontractor couldn't get there. Ultimately, they let him go. They brought in another one, and the one that came in did a much better job. But by that time, a lot of money had been spent trying to keep up that the initial sub. So we lost a few opportunities for detailing. So the biggest design challenge was sort of accepting that there were going to be certain concrete elements, concrete detailing elements that we just would have loved to have in the building. And perhaps as an architect, I'm the only one that pays attention to them. But I would tell everyone, go see a Starpa building and tell me if I'm the only one that pays attention to it, But at the end of the day, that was the biggest challenge, is how to deal with some of those conditions that didn't come out like we wanted them to in the concrete detail. Again, other ones came out perfect. Like the facade looks great. There are some elements that we were able to keep. Like one of the things that came into play is we used a concrete block, an ICF form, which is a styrofoam concrete block to do a pour-in-place formwork. And we ended up sandblasting it out in the stairwells because you don't need it. Once it's poured, it's not structural. It's good for sound and energy, but we didn't need it in our stairwell. And so we sandblasted off, and the resulting finish was just gorgeous. Happy accident, which sometimes can happen with concrete. So there are times that things like that come into play. So for every drywall detail that I had to kind of deal with because of a poor finishing with the concrete, there were beautiful moments where the concrete got to shine through and be done well.
Well, and those are the kinds of things that do make us better professionals, because I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, okay, when I wrote the spec for that next project, because of course that's the aspect I'm looking at, I would probably require some heavier requirements than maybe I already had for the concrete sub. Pre-qualification is in experience or size of company or type of work that they've done.
It's a great point, Teresa. I think that is actually yes, please do, because ultimately concrete, as we know, once it's poured and hardened, not much you can do.
Yeah.
Right, you're stuck. And so Europeans have a much better understanding of this, and actually everywhere in the world besides America has a much better understanding of this. But once you've done poured it, you're kind of screwed unless you want to tear it down. And telling a client they have to go backwards is not an easy thing to do. They'll just be like, all right, let's come up with a detail to fix this problem, and then all of a sudden what you might have planned goes away. And had we spend more time really understanding, and the concrete sub wasn't bad, it was just too big of a job. And so there were areas that he just didn't address in the way that we had requested in our drawings. And the spec had it. It wasn't like I'd go to the general contractor and go, look, it's in my specification, but the client is sitting there saying, I don't care, I'm not going backwards. Figure out how to detail around it. So yes, vetting a concrete sub to be able to handle intricacies, if they do exist in a building, should definitely be part of the initial specification.
Well, and we have challenges now with skilled labor at a level we've never had them before, forcing us to think about things at a level we didn't have to before.
Yep.
Because it's getting harder and harder to find the people that have the experience, especially when you're getting more complicated or getting larger. It's getting harder to do.
Yeah, the problem with that, Teresa, is I know that line of thinking trends towards prefabrication. And there's values in prefabricated and modular, they, especially for housing, there's advantages, but call me old school. Building a building from the ground up and making it as it's designed and how it's supposed to be. Let's hope for a resurgence of skilled labor, because there's inherent value to making something beautiful like that rather than Legos,
Yeah, this girl is not going to argue with you. I also like brutalist architecture, by the way.
Oh, very nice. Me too.
Were there any unique sustainability efforts made outside the solar canopy? Did you have any sustainability efforts you made on this project?
I'm glad you brought that up, because studios are a bane to sustainability. Interestingly enough, on that project where Apple leased one of our studios, I met with Apple. Apple has a department working on the sustainability of studios, and I met with them, had talks with them, in this particular building, we have the solar canopy, which allowed us to recover some energy. We have obviously electrical charging vehicles to deal with some electric cars. And we use the insulated concrete form, which is a recycled styrofoam formwork. So we had no waste when it came to concrete formwork. And they also assisted with energy recovery on the interior of the studio, or so energy release, not as much release, and some sound mitigation. But truth be told, studios are energy sucking beasts. After we did Glendale, or I should say during it, we actually reached out to Bureau Happel, a strong MEP engineering firm that wants to work with us. And one of the requirements of working with us is, I said, we have to sit down and go through and really prepare a white paper and understand how we can make a sustainable studio. It's my belief that if my office, Bell Designer, can create a sustainable studio method, that we will move to the forefront of studio design, because it's impossible now. The amount of heating and cooling for a volume of that size with giant operable openings is enormously problematic. It just don't comply. You could use all the sustainable and recycled materials in the world, and you wouldn't comply because of your energy loss requirements to cool and heat the building. And unions that fill inside these buildings require them to be set at certain temperatures for a certain amount of time, or they can walk off the job. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I want to say that I have taken it personally, having designed now, I think we're on our 6th, 7th studio in the office, to really sit down and figure this out. It's something that I believe the Amazons, the Apples, everybody who has a sustainable, conscious method or forward-thinking method would love to market their ability to say our studio is sustainable, and we want to be at the forefront of that. So right now, unfortunately, besides the ones I spoke of, that's about as far as we got. But we are looking to be build a better mousetrap.
Well, somebody has to pave the way, correct? I mean,
Yeah.
it has to happen, and eventually, the hope is eventually everything we do is going to be more sustainable. And there are all kinds of business types that it's harder to
Sure.
get there. But if nobody's ever asking the question, then we don't make any steps forward. So in my opinion, any step you make forward, any new change you make over time is one more step in the right direction. But you have to be asking the
first meetings
questions.
were pretty funny. I was the true architect. I'm like, what if we had sound waves running across the middle of the building that didn't allow the heat or air to go? I mean, the engineers are just looking at me going, well, but I just throw out stuff, whatever it is to get their minds coursing. Because I find that with engineers, once you start their minds on a problem and sort of give them the ability to think outside of the box on it, you can achieve pretty amazing stuff. And I will say, Bureau Apple's been really great so far. We're looking at the double wall system with the heat recovery and really interesting things. And again, I'm no engineer. I understand the physics of how hot and cold air move through a building, but using their beautiful minds in the process has been a really enjoyable way to get there. Not there yet. Maybe on the next one.
Well, they can't sleep at night till they solve it.
That's true.
Having worked with engineers now in 2 different arenas, I promise you give them a challenge, even if they don't say anything in the moment, they can't sleep until they solve it.
All right, I get a 2 a.m. call for sure.
Speaking of challenges, I've never been involved in any project that didn't have a challenge during construction. Some of our best lessons learned, like talking about the whole concrete deal, happens during construction when the rubber meets the road and we are now building whatever it is we designed. Tell me about the construction phase on this project and at least one challenge. You have to pick a different one now that you told me about the concrete.
No
at
problem.
least one challenge that you encountered during construction and how you navigated it to get where you wanted to go.
So I hesitate to talk about it, but it did happen. It's news. It's not hidden. We have a number of challenges. One of them is the engineer of the project passed away during construction.
Oh.
So we had to get a second engineer in place who helped us with designs, submittal, and approval. Then the client decided to use a steel company out of Mexico to build the trusses and then one in Los Angeles to assemble the ledgers to support the trusses. And I don't think they went Class A on the subcontractors, and they weren't watching what they were doing. And about halfway through our truss construction, the trusses collapsed inside the building. So luckily, no one was killed, thank God. I think one worker might have been injured, and there were 40 people on site that day. So it's incredible that these trusses, they all fell into the cavity of the building. It was maybe 10 trusses. And these are 8-foot tall, 80-foot long. So it was not a small thing. It was on the news, Glendale, helicopters, the whole thing. That was a massive challenge. So the new engineer, just an amazing guy, Andy Alexander and Associates, came in, and he was already in, and he helped us. He helped us figure our way through the project, which was phenomenal. The client pivoted to the initial subcontractor, which we had recommended, a company called JD2 out of, I think it's mid sort of Central California, Riverside. They are incredible. They built 2 of my stages before. I think they're just amazing. And it did cost us about 6 months of the project. But they were able to get in there, remove all the bad trusses, bring in new ones, install them. And it went seamlessly from that point forward. So I've never had anything like that happen. None of my buildings fall down, right? So as an architect, when part of your building falls down, you feel inherently, what did I do wrong? But we went through our drawings. We went through, even the engineer, deceased and new, went through all of our work. And everything we had proposed was approved, accepted, shop drawn. Well, at the end of the day, we think there was probably human error. We think maybe the lift bumped a truss, and the way the trusses were tack welded together to sort of hold them while they were being bolted in was not strong enough. And when it bumped it knocked one down and then took it like a slinky the rest of the way in the space. And so first time anything like that has ever happened to me. I was actually in Las Vegas at a conference, and someone's like, go on the news. And so I went on the internet and saw the Glendale news, and I was like, oh my God, what happens now? And again, no path forward. Now I know how to do it. But at the time, I did not understand the process. But, client was, I got to give it to East End. They're just amazing. They pushed through the problem. Everybody on the team kind of came together. We worked through the situation, and, we're up putting in trusses place 6 months later. So yes, we lost a little bit of time, but we all rolled with it and made it happen, and produced what ended up being an exceptionally strong and worthy building at the end of the day. So it just goes to show, sometimes those things can be super detrimental. But first of all, the fact that no one was, I think someone got a hurt leg, not even broken. Thank goodness that was the result of that no one resulted in any major injury or death. And the second part was just how the team just coalesced and said, we'll figure this out. Let's get through this, instead of pointing fingers and blaming the whole way.
I can only imagine how difficult it was. Something like that would send me right over the edge. How difficult it was to have that happen and to go through that. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate you sharing that story, because most wouldn't. Yeah. They just even if it's public knowledge. Yeah, but even on the news, that doesn't necessarily mean anybody's going to know about it. But there's so many valuable lessons learned. And I'm not speaking to your client or your project at all. I want to make that clear. But I have worked on my fair share of developer type of projects over the years. And I have seen some developers, the cost is always such an issue with developers, but they're not necessarily going to be the ones living in the building. And they're not maybe necessarily as construction or architecture savvy. They're more the money people. And I think that it's a really good, just back to that collaboration and communication, and sometimes speed or cost is not worth it. And you got a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to tell a developer that's trying to meet a budget. I mean, look, it's not like they have unending amounts of money, and architects sometimes act like that. We really don't. We put a lot of time into our clients' budget consideration to working with them. But I got to say, East End they're a fantastic client. And we've gone up and down with them on a number of projects, and we got released on one and then hired on another, and released on one and hired on another, and that happens. I mean, they have their own hierarchical bureaucratic structure, but the team itself that works on those projects, John Meyer, Dennis, all those guys, Shep, they listen when they're supposed to, and they follow direction, and they're innovative and thoughtful in the process while maintaining their need for a budget to be in place. And sometimes the results aren't what I want. There are interiors portions that I'm not particularly fond of, but were budgetary considerations. There were some ceilings that I wanted, and we ended up putting in different ones. Okay, that's every project, unless you have some house in Malibu where the check is forever. But that's okay. It's the parts where it's difficult that matter. And when the difficulty came with the concrete sub and with the collapse, the client was just so admirable in the process. Again, listening and following directions, but at the same time leading. And that's just an amazing quality. I can't say enough about how East End was just a pleasure to work with and for in the process of this build.
Well, and one more testament, because you've gone through a number of them now, of how a good team can work even in the face of adversity.
Sure.
Because I worked on a project in the Middle East once where the whole building collapsed.
Oh, geez.
Because and on that project they were column forms, and building standards in other countries are not always what they are here.
Yeah.
And apparently what happened was the sub decided to throw all their construction waste inside that column form and then fill it up with concrete. That didn't work so well. And the building wasn't done, but what was done collapsed, and they had to start all over. Yeah. Nobody could have foreseen that. Nobody could have prevented it. Nobody saw this sub doing that. Had another one where a building flooded because of roofings, and I'm not trashing subs. Anybody listening, you guys do amazing work, but there's good and bad in every arena. A roofing sub was pouring their roofing tar or whatever chemical it was, whatever they were using up there, pouring it down the roof drain. And nobody knew they did that. And later the building ended up flooding. I mean, stuff happens. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that anybody did anything particularly wrong, or maybe it's one player that had nothing to do with that design, or
in this instance, in this instance, I think it was human error. I think the boom lift just upped the truss, and the sequencing and way they were putting it together, couldn't allow for that. You would never predict that in a million years that type of thing would happen. Yeah, look, we all have it's like poker, right? We all have the bad beats that we all face. There's always going to be a horror story around construction. Right. Again, the beauty of this one is the way that the client dealt with it was super positive and forward moving, and got us to finish line of was one of the best buildings that I've ever built so far.
At the end of the day, that's what matters, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is a stupid question after that conversation. What would you say your biggest lesson learned was from this project that will make you a better architect on the next project?
Well, I think the concrete one is probably the biggest one. It's the lesson on every project. As much as I want to say that there was something special about this one, the concrete one is the most special, right? Is that detailing concrete, you really have to make sure that you're on top of the subcontractor as the architect, not the GC. You need to go to the GC and ask to be a part of all the subcontractor meetings with the concrete sub, so you, the architect, can be in front of it. So that's an important lesson, and it's just I don't know how many more concrete buildings I'll be able to get involved in. When I do, I know that that's important. But the lesson that I take from every project is keep learning. I mean, I keep learning. I learn different stuff all the time on these projects. Like what foam roofing versus the TPO roofing, right? One may be cheaper, another one may not be warranted as long, and it's just a beautiful cycle in the process where you get to learn the process of what how to make it better every time. So the lesson I learned on this one for and pretty much the lesson I learned on almost every project is there were elements I could have done better, and they will be there on the next studio. And they could be as small as a tread detail, and they could be as big as following the concrete sub as they pour. Making sure that everything is in line.
I do a lot of teaching and mentoring, and I teach people at all levels, you know, fresh out of school to 30 or 40 years in the business. And I always say, the minute you think you know everything, please get the hell out of our industry.
Yeah.
Because it's a lifelong learner profession. If you're not learning something constantly, then you're doing something really, really wrong.
There's
That
more
is
you
going to
don't know,
result.
and the more
Yeah.
that you know. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly. So before I get to my two closing questions, what's next for Bell Design Group? What are you working on that I get to call you about later and say, guess what? You get to come back and talk to me again.
We've got some exciting stuff going on. We're working on a concept for a resort in Greece. So we opened an office in Madrid. We are international now, and we're doing an incredible resort in Greece that's 40 private bungalows, a hotel, and then a series of amenities on a west-facing portion of an island in the Ionian Sea. It's actually got one of the oldest cities in Greece on it, Simi, and it looks at Ithaca as the sun sets between the two islands. It's just exquisite, and it's built into a 200-year-old vineyard. So we're making a green roof, green design, again, concrete stone, but all the bungalows have, unobstructed views and you can't see the other bungalows. So that's an exceptional project we're involved in. We are doing another studio. This one's in Boston, which is super interesting to build on the East Coast. We're doing a studio in Winnipeg, which looks like it's going to finally move forward. Also a cold weather studio, which is a totally different way of designing because you have to think of conditioned spaces throughout. Not like Los Angeles, where it's just the studio, but an office, but you have to think about how people are going to carry a set from the mill to the studio in, 30 below weather or inclement weather. So we've got a 240 affordable unit, 240 unit affordable housing project in San Diego. That's super exciting. Partner just joined and they've upped the financial responsibility because they want it to be Class A, which is just wonderful because now we get to include some nice amenities and furnishing and things like this. Wow, yeah, we have a lot. Invariably at Bell Design Group, we typically have anywhere from 80 to 100 projects. So we're super excited. We're starting to engage into competitions. We're doing a park in Madrid, which is super interesting because it's near an industrial site. So we're trying to incorporate industrial sensibilities like a mural tag wall that can be tagged over and over and over again so they don't tag the rest of the park. Instead of these sort of uniform, laid out conservative European parks, this one's got a skate park in it. And the idea is that as you're going around the traffic circle, you'll see someone fly out of a mound because this skate park has a is recessed into a hillside. So it's stuff like that. We're super excited.
You don't look for the easy projects, do you?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do is be design forward. For a long time, as the former company Relativity and currently as Bell Design Group, we built. That was our focus on constructing. I think we've built a lot and we've shown that we're capable. And so now we want to show you we can build design forward projects, which I know we how to build. Just keep kind of flexing and moving it forward. We're very, very excited about the stuff that's coming.
Well, if you ever need a spec writer to go do a site visit in Madrid or particularly that project in Greece, just let me know.
No problem, Cerise. You got it.
Greece is that's one of my bucket list places I haven't made it to yet. So you're describing this and I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
I want to go
it's
there.
fantastic. It's interesting because we're actually part of the ownership. One of the things we jumped in was it's speculative. So we designed it. One of the owners who owns the land got the budgets and the numbers. We were able to get Virgin to sign an LOI that they would manage. and now we're introducing it to the financial partners and equity partners. It's actually not very much money to build it. Greece is, a little bit less in cost, and it's on this island that's just super quiet. It's not like Crete or Mykonos, the super party islands. This one is focused much more quiet and as the gentleman owns the property, Greeks know, but no one else does. And the waters are, the typical Mediterranean, super blue water. It's just gorgeous. I can't wait. I would love to see this done in about 2 years so that I know where to take my vacation.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here going, you could just stop talking now because I'm just ridiculously jealous. I always close with 2 questions, a broad industry question and our final question. So the industry question, I read in your bio that you have a passion for art and that you continue to explore the physicality of art and architecture through your work. Quote, how do you think the profession of architecture could improve in this arena, and what should we be doing to bring more art and artistic elements to our projects?
So my art part is that I was a painter going into architecture school, and I went to architecture school to be a better painter. I just got hooked on the right brain stuff. I find myself just fascinated by systems analysis and the difficult mathematical portions of architecture while engaging in the aesthetics. I still paint, mostly watercolors now, so I'm not imbuing my work with direct art. However, I am just a huge proponent of incorporating art into buildings. We research, I think almost every project we attempt to bring in an artist to do something special. In every way. If we can do the art ourselves, we will. Like for East End, we actually designed their logo. So I know that's like a small portion of art. It's kind of a big move. For a studio we did in Los Angeles, we are working with a muralist to create the fourth largest mural in the world, 600 foot long, 30 foot tall, all down the LA River. We have projects where we brought in a mosaic artist to do a giant wall of mosaic contemporary sort of design that they put together to represent contextual areas. We have muralists in New York going into our New York project in a stairwell, and they're doing murals in the stairwell on the way up. Wherever you can find a way to include an artist in the architecture, not that you hang on a wall, in the architecture, do it. I mean, I'm just a huge proponent of that. I love it. It gives a quality to the building and to the spaces that is timeless. Even as the art ages and may become dated, it's still a timeless sensibility. The binoculars in the Gehry building in Santa Monica, the Chiat Day building, which I don't think Chiat Day's there anymore, but the building that Frank Gehry designed where he got Oldenburg to put 2 giant binoculars at the entrance of the building. That's putting art in your building. Do it whatever you can.
Well, I asked that question for a reason because I love nothing more than going into a building or approaching a building and it having some kind of artistic element incorporated. And I'm sorry, you can walk into some pretty darn old buildings.
They'll have it.
And encounter, I've said this before in the podcast, I'm probably sick of me saying it, but the first time that I walked into St. Peter's, I cried.
Yeah.
I never had it. That was the first time a building actually made me have that strong of an emotional response. And I'm not even religious.
Sure.
But it's just everywhere you look. I didn't go in and say, this is kind of dated.
Right.
Okay, that might be art on steroids, but still, it is a game changer in the depth of the experience of that building rather than, 4 walls and.
Sure. For me, it was Sagrada Familia, but I get it. I hear you.
I haven't been there yet.
Oh,
it's on my list. My list is so long, it's not even funny. I feel like I've never.
That I have a lot of favorites, but that's the best building in the world. Is Sagrada Familia, no question. When you go, you'll understand that the art comes down to the door. The artist designed a beetle in wood crawling outside of the foliage that's carved into the door. It's just from that to the physics behind the structure of the building and how he's joined everything. It brings you to your knees.
Okay, I'm bringing it right up on my list because I also have it, as unreligious as I am, I have this weird little addiction to really cool churches.
Yeah. Well,
So
Sagrada
yeah,
Familia, I've never seen anything like it to this day. And I've been to some pretty amazing pieces of architecture. You know, the Vitra campus, just nothing like that.
all right. I'm redoing my list right after this podcast. Final question. Everybody gets this question. And you get to answer it again, although I have changed the wording just a tad. We all hope to live a life, I know I do, that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. Whether that can be little things or big things. Little things sometimes have the biggest impact. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
This is a great question.
Thank you.
There's some light stuff, and it's probably going to be different than I answered the first time, because life takes a bunch of different curves and changes. The last 6 months have been intense. A lot of shifting in my world, a lot of changes, and one of the things that I really spent a lot of time realizing, and I'm super proud of where I got to. Now, it's taken a lot of work, but it's to accept that I and the work that I do is enough. It's not to present more than I need to. It's not to blow myself up and talk about all the accomplishments or buildings I've built. It's to basically say I'm enough. I'm enough in the work that I do. I'm enough with the person that I am, and that, accepted at face value, can stand on its own. So when you say what type of mark or contribution, it's that I did enough. It's that I am enough. And that is a very interesting place to be in a world where we wear a lot of masks and try and present ourselves as something more than we are quite often to either get attention, move forward, gain a promotion, whatever it is. And I think I'm at a point in my life and in my career where I'm enough. You're going to hire me because I'm good. You're going to hire me because I'm enough. You're going to see the projects I do because I'm enough, and my projects will win awards because they're enough. Or they won't, but they'll still be enough in what they do. So I'll leave it with that, is that a strong realization came, and this is only in the past month or so that I got here, which is to say that I am enough, and that applies to everything I do.
Isn't it a beautiful feeling?
Yeah, really is.
It was about 9 years. It was about 9 years ago for me.
Yeah.
It's. I went through a lot of pretty major life changes about 9 years ago, and also being a woman raised in this world, going through different times. But it was a long, hard road to get to that point where I could say, you don't have to like me. There's I don't know how many billions of people on the planet. Go find one you like, because I'm good. I know I'm a good person. I know that I give a lot, but I don't take as much as I used to.
Yep.
That doormat's not across my forehead anymore either.
Exactly.
But when you hit that comfort level where I'm good, I'm in a good place and I'm doing good things, and me knowing that is enough, it's a pretty amazing spot to be. I love your answer. It's like, I gotta go back and look at what I said before. It was probably global domination. well, my question was, what's your world domination statement in the first interview? And a couple of people actually took offense at me calling it world domination, even when I explained what I meant by that. So I thought,
well, I mean, all those people can see that real transition does happen. So
yes,
maybe a little on the arrogant side. It doesn't mean I don't want to keep producing. It doesn't mean I don't want to be successful and do wonderful projects. But I don't want to have to engage with them on anything more than what I offer as a real person, and as what I am, and how I can offer, how I can work with my clients to create. And so far, it's been the best year. So I think that realization has enabled me to grow and enable the business to grow. And I think Bell Design Group will be one of those companies where people see the honesty and the transparency and the passion, and that's what will drive them to work.
That's you're just getting started. And my life has done like a complete 360. I'm not even sure how many times now in the last 9 years, and that comfort level and that confidence and that ability to just do you, that authenticity is a game changer.
Makes a big difference.
So whatever's going good right now is only getting better.
Thank you.
Take it from a pro. Tima, it has been an absolute, I knew this was going to be a fun interview because we've chatted before. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today about this project. Thank you so much for taking time out of your crazy busy schedule right now.
That's all right.
To talk to me. I hope you'll come back.
I will. Let's do the next one. Maybe Greece.
Okay.
We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, I will record anything you want if it's in Greece.
All right.
Thank you again.
Thank you.